Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming to our exciting conversation today. We're going to give it just another minute for participants to filter in. Okay, well, I don't want to wait any longer. I know that we have some people here on our Zoom. We also are live streaming this. So however you are coming to us, welcome to our Keeping It Local. Where does Pittsburgh get its news? And I am Nora Benavides. I will be moderating today's discussion. I am the Director of US Free Expression Programs at PEN America. And I am so thrilled to be here with my colleagues from World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. And I want to thank our co-sponsors, Free Press, Pittsburgh Media Partnership, and City of Asylum. It has been a labor of love for all of us across these organizations, pulling this wonderful town hall together. And I know that we are virtual, but I hope that we can break down some of those barriers of awkwardness and have a really rich discussion today. And so I would love to turn it over to my colleagues from my other organizations that we have worked with. To set the stage just briefly, I will tell you that this is one of several events that we are hosting throughout the country virtually. This wonderful partnership with World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh is particularly special because we are working through and supporting all of the ways that local journalism can be a pillar of a resilient, healthy, and equitable democracy. And so we feel that this discussion today exemplifies all of the ways, and we hope it exemplifies all of the ways that local journalists, local media, the voices that you will hear today are critical lifelines to how we connect with each other. And so without further ado, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Vanessa at Free Press, who is going to give just a couple of remarks. And from there, I will turn it over to wonderful Betty Cruz from World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh.
Hello, my name is Vanessa Maria Graber, and I am the News Voices New Jersey manager at Free Press. And we are really excited to be here to co-sponsor this series of town hall events talking about my favorite issue, local journalism. For folks who are unfamiliar with Free Press, we are a media advocacy organization, and we advocate for free and open internet, access to media and information sources, and we do a lot of work around privacy and surveillance issues. We also fight for the future of journalism. Our initiative, News Voices, organizes with communities and newsrooms to transform local journalism. Local journalism plays a critical role in our communities because communities deserve a critical role in local journalism. It shapes our lives, it holds leaders accountable, it connects our communities, it creates positive change. And through News Voices, we bring communities and newsrooms together by increasing community access to and engagement with local newsrooms, strengthening news and information, supporting our civic needs, working together in collaborations like this so we can co-create solutions to make sure people have the news and information that they need. If you'd like more information about Free Press, you can visit our website, freepress.net, and also you can check out newsvoices.org for a wealth of resources if you would like to learn more about how to organize with journalists and engage your communities further about news and information. And now I'd like to pass it off to Betty Cruz from World Affairs Pittsburgh.
Thanks so much, Vanessa, and thank you, Nora, for your partnership. Hi, everyone. I'm Betty Cruz with the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. As we look at the role of local news in today's talk, we invite you to think about the importance of global issues in your news cycle and to consider how events around the world shape what we experience every day at the local level, whether we realize it or not. This includes everything from editorial decisions to how we engage with our neighbors. To ground us in this global perspective rooted in his lived experience, it is my honor to introduce Tuhin Das. Tuhin is a Bengali poet, activist, political columnist, short story writer, and essayist, broadly published in Bangladesh and West Bengal, India. He is the author of 8 poetry books in his native language. His full-length, unpublished manuscript Exile Poems focuses on his life as an exiled writer. Since 2013, Tuhin has been the target of fundamentalist militant groups who have murdered secular writers and activists in Bangladesh. Instead of protecting him, the police collected and examined his writings for anti-Islamic statements to use against him. To save his own life, he had no choice but to go into hiding and find a way out of Bangladesh. He left his country in April of 2016. Tuhin Das is now an Eichhorn writer in residence at City of Asylum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Tuhin. You're muted, Tuhin.
Thank you, Betty. I am going to read a long poem called Exile Poem. In this poem, I reflect on a writer's struggle against censorship in Bangladesh and the power of words and empathy in difficult times. Since 2016, more than 50 writers and activists in Bangladesh were killed by Islamic militants. Exile Poem. I write, when a dark night has gathered over Bangladesh, my writer friend is afraid. A mournful clock by his bed rings out suddenly. He wakes up, his eyes bulging in terror. One word escapes his lips, assassin. He is a poet. He could have spoken of the stars which show us the way even in the dark. He could have spoken of a singing bird nesting in a tree by his house, searching for a companion. Of the moon, whose showers resplendent beams at night, or of the lover who waits somewhere far away. He didn't speak of any of these. All he said was assassin. For he had forsaken the soul, spirits, and divine messengers. He had summoned God to the courtroom as the accused to declare, not all emptiness creates space. I had heard the sound when he slammed the door in the face of blind faith. What he wrote injured the fundamentalist. He could not visit his ailing mother. He had to go many days with just one meal. In my imagination, I heard his plea to be a free human being. Death was waiting for him in disguise on the road. Beasts of prey were sniffing the air to hunt him down. Like the crashing waves in the ocean, his blood is agitated today. Like the shadow beneath the light, his thoughts have cooled. I felt it too, once. When I was on the run to escape the fundamentalist machetes, I had waited for the summer, thinking of going to the mountains or to the sea. But no, I went into long hibernation for 7 months in 4 cities, displaced in my own country. A singer lived in the room next to mine. I would hear him sing at dawn every day across the wall, like the bird at the tiny prison window who perches on the sill to whistle and brings reminders of days of freedom. The song would make me think how beautiful the world is. I felt I had to thank him, but despite these thoughts, I never did meet him. For I was afraid, what if he recognized me? A well-wisher was death-bound, lying in a hospital bed with cancer. I couldn't pay a visit or even stand for a minute in silence by the grave. Still, we couldn't stop writing, neither I nor that terrified writer in whose nightmares the assassin came to knock at his door. Splinters of light are embedded in our hearts like shrapnel. Even if we were to be buried and stoned, we would not be defeated. We would fly the white flag of peace, not a black pennant eulogizing a false god. We should shout. If our throats are slit, we would whisper. Our chain of words would reach the next generation, even if they had to flow along a river of blood. And the kingfisher would alight to sit by our dreams. Thank you so much for giving me this platform and listening to me.
Thank you, Tuhin. That was beautiful. As I was sitting here, we have the privilege, my colleagues and I at PEN America, of working at an organization that elevates the literary arts and defends free expression. And I just want to thank you, Tuhin, for your wonderful, beautiful words. Thank you for sharing those with all of us. It is our programmatic dream to always marry the work we do with our literary partners and with our free expression advocates. So this feels like a perfect tribute to that goal. And I'm very, very grateful, and I know we all are. I would like to open us up now for what comes next. And as we're here together today, thinking about, frankly, the next generation and dreams, and what would a resilient and healthy democracy look like, we're here to discuss how that would look in Pittsburgh. And so I would love to introduce my fellow panelists. If you guys would join us by turning your cameras on. I would love to introduce Mila Sanina, who currently serves as the Executive Director of Public Source, a nonprofit newsroom delivering public service journalism in the Pittsburgh region on issues of environment, race, police accountability, local government, education, and economic development. I would also like to introduce Tony Norman of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Tony, thank you so much for being here. Tony is an award-winning columnist at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He began as a clerk in 1988 before becoming their pop culture, pop music critic in 1989. Tony, we're gonna have to talk about that later because I wanna dig into it. And he began his general interest column in 96. There is so much about Tony that I feel like probably everyone here knows who Tony is, and it is just an honor that he has graced us, and we're thrilled to have you. And then finally, Amy Jo Brown. Amy Jo is a veteran investigative reporter and editor who currently leads the Pittsburgh Media Partnership, which is such an exciting endeavor. It's a collaborative of 23 local news organizations where she helps to coordinate coverage on special editorial projects, implement capacity building initiatives. I feel like together, these three wonderful local voices will have a lot to say about how Pittsburgh gets its news. So I want to dive in. What we're going to do is go through hopefully some questions. You guys will agree, disagree, dive into it. And then we want to open it up for discussion and questions with our audience. So I just want to flag for people, if you have questions while people are chatting, please put it in the Q&A box and we'll try to integrate it into the discussion. I'll kick us off with something slightly general, and that is sort of just focused on the vitality of news and how we often talk about, at least I know I talk about, this concept of a free press. that freedom of the press is essential, that it helps support democracy. And those are great lines, don't get me wrong, right? But it's kind of vague. And I think it really isn't at all local. And so I want to go local, and I want to talk about why local news matters in Pittsburgh. What is lost when you don't have it? And why is access to local news so vital, not just to democracy, not to just the United States or a healthy society, but to our community here? I'll kick it off to Mila.
Well, that's a tough one. Thank you for having me, first of all, to be part of this important panel among this significant and very well-known voices in local journalism in Pittsburgh. I think that as somebody who is not a Pittsburgher, but was born in the Soviet Union and was raised in the country of independent Kazakhstan, where local journalism is something that exists, but is very hard to do because of where we are. I would say that, where in the United States, you do, just like all politics is local, I would argue that all journalism is local, and it starts with local journalism. I mean, it feeds the food chain of national journalism. It feeds the food chain of actually democracy, because that's how the theory of change of democracy happens, right? People learn of information because transparency is so important, and journalism and reporters are reporting it, and then advocates and take it and push for change for the better. And that's the basic mechanism of evaluation, how effective our government is in representing the people. So I think aside from that, right, there is also journalism and storytelling is so important to inspire, to delight, to connect, to have a sense of place. And in the city of Pittsburgh, our beloved place, it's so important to know what other people in our communities are doing, how they live life, how they engage, vote, play, and all the other things. So I would say that that's my short, I guess, introduction to why local journalism is so important.
Yeah, it's been the heartbeat of American democracy, since the beginners, since the founders of this country, and even before then. But I mean, the Tocqueville definitely showed how American journalism, local journalism, was almost a perfect reflection of the communities in which it was embedded. And with all of its contradictions, local journalism really does show someone just sort of dropping into any given city, something of the spirit of that town. It's almost spooky. For better or for worse, local journalism, be it newspapers or radio or things on social media in that town, really does take the temperature of that town in an accurate way. And when news sources depart from that, there's generally a revolt against it. You think about maybe even the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette in recent years, when it has sort of moved away from a sort of a moderate to liberal voice to embrace one that is more extremist and right wing. People voted with their feet and sort of turned away from it to other sources, which in a sense revitalized other news sources. I mean, I know a lot of folks who dropped their subscription to the PG and embraced Public Source or the Trib or many of the rivals. And I think in a way, in the long run, that's been very good for local media here, because all of a sudden there are new voices. I mean, I tell you, I found Pittsburgh City Paper and Public Source. I mean, all of these are much more vital, despite the fact that the pandemic sort of like hooked everyone up and knocked everyone down a notch or two. Some of the best reporting is coming from these it's coming from sources other than Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Tribune Review. Not to say that there isn't great reporting coming out of those traditional sources, but I mean, it is really short-sighted just to stop at the PG or just stop at the Trib. You really do have to look at the whole horizon of local news here, because there's just dynamic stuff happening. WESA, they have this explainer program that ironically enough, I mean, they're on hiatus now as of last Friday, but I mean, I found that indispensable. I had to listen to Pittsburgh Explainer because it explained things that my paper didn't explain or that the other sources didn't. So so I think, we're going through a renaissance right now.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think that local news is a very tangible thing. When people are reading it, it's something where they recognize the voices. They may even, be able to put the sound to the rhythm of what they're reading, and they'll know whether it was truly said or not, right? Like they are able to bring more of their own judgment to what they're reading and hearing, because it's something that they're familiar with. And I think that lends more credibility to it than it does to say something abstract and national or global that they haven't heard or experienced in their day-to-day life. And there's a way that I think a lot of people, even in locally, like you may be curious about a different community and not have a means of accessing it, but your local paper can take you there. You can hear stories about those folks. So to me, it's a way of connecting worlds in a way that some people are not going to do on their own, but it's so missed if that's not there for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in times of, national emergency, let's say, you turn on the cable television and, you try to get a sense of what's going on because you feel that sort of existential threat. But when you're feeling civic, you really do turn to your newspapers, or you go to a trustworthy local website, to understand what's going on. If you want like the minutia, if you want the detail of what's going on. And I think that's how we're oriented. We're not going to necessarily turn to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette if you want, like the 411 on what's happening in DC, but you will turn to your local paper, the PG or whatever, or a source if you want to know what's happening in the mayoral race here. And that's, that feels nice, that feels natural. And I think that's going to continue.
Well, I want to go back to something, Amy Jo, you mentioned around sort of what I think speaks to division. And I often feel when we talk about local news, there is now an elephant in the room, and I will name it. I think it is misinformation. I think it is how we consider the various ecosystems in which we are getting information, and that potentially the things I see could be very different from what Amy Jo sees. And the choices then that flow out of what we see really are indicative of so much, how we live our lives. And I'm just curious, I'll turn first to Mila, because I'm curious to hear how you think about and what you would say around the way that misinformation fuels fragmentation, and specifically a fragmented media. If we are more and more polarized and going to further realms of information.
Well, unfortunately, this trend of hyper, I would say, fragmentation of media has been going on for a while now, and has only been, I would say, stronger after Donald Trump. And I think that on the national stage, we have seen that, and we have all complained about it, and we have talked about it. But we all thought that, on the local level, it's less so. I think that people are, it's hard to scale this type of hyper fragmentation and hyper politicization to the local level. But what's worrisome, though, is that as much as fragmentation of media can be an indicator of healthy ecosystem because of a diversity of voices and bringing in great reporting from different outlets, it also can be the sign of people going rather than going to a trustworthy source to hear perspectives that they may not hear. They may be getting their primary news or information from Facebook or Facebook group that may be feeding off of hate and anger and anti-Semitic sentiments, I think that's when it becomes truly, truly dangerous. And we have seen that locally as well. And when that pans out, like it's on my block, it's on my neighborhood, I can't really trust people. That really starts this seeding mistrust. And I think that we underestimate how much the healthy democracy depends on that. Depends on trust. How much do you trust your neighbors? Do you get the same information? Do you believe in climate change? And we have seen that with COVID and now, with the coronavirus, on how much this misinformation can kill people, literally. And I think that that's a huge danger where you don't have no more the arbiter of like, this has been verified, this has been vetted. There is so many sources that everybody can go to whatever they believe is true. And the sense of scientific proof and verified, trustworthy information is not as strong as it used to be.
Yeah, for sure. And here in Western Pennsylvania, we have a really, for lack of a better word, strong right-wing conservative radio community. I mean,
yes,
there's.
I'm glad you're getting into it, Tony.
I mean, we don't have to say the name of a particularly notorious right-wing talk show host who recently lost yet another platform. But such voices have been able to operate with impunity in Western Pennsylvania. I mean, even to the point of radicalizing mass killers over the years. You think about the Tree of Life shooter, who was a devoted listener to local right-wing talk radio, which is, it accepts no empirical model of truth. It is really whatever the host pulls out of his or her ass. And there's always going to be a willing, credulous, population of people who remember that. And that carries so much weight. I mean, if you talk to, ordinary Yinzers, sometimes they will talk about what they heard on certain radio stations more than what they've read, because there isn't a whole lot of reading. And whatever happens on Facebook is not even reading. That's just like wholesale, just sort of boom, consuming without any sort of like thoughtful digestion of ideas. So I think a lot of it is generational. Maybe my co-panelists may think differently, but I think this seems to be something that's really a thing among older people I talked to who were just really, really scary, are radio fans as opposed to reading a newspaper or a book or anything. Maybe Fox. I should throw in Fox News. That is also the accelerant for these folks. So
yeah, I would say I think that to Tony's point about the generational aspect of this, I think that for a lot of people who grew up, this is an older area as well. So you do have that impact of it, right? We have a large older population, and I think the world is just changing at a pace that is faster than any of them have had. I mean, it's jarring from that side of the thing. And you know,
I wonder what it is, though. I wonder what it is that's jarring them and scaring them.
Well, it's, you know, when I talk to folks, you know, so I grew up in Beaver County. So even though I live and work in the city, I do go home and I watch the Facebook groups of folks that I grew up with who share a lot of these views. And I think it's, you know, it's this idea that they are, they like to know their place and position.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
they don't feel like they understand it anymore. And this is coming on top of also this generation, you know, my father, like the very generations of people and men who expected to go to work and live their lives a certain way. We also lived through all of that world changing and upending where they didn't know their place then, right? So now again, where do you fit? What's your place? How does your community function? Again, it would be great if people were more adaptable and more open, but I think that's part of where it gets really hard. And then you're adding in to Mila and Nora's point about the misinformation that's coming down. And now you're to the point where your neighbor is no longer seen as an individual. They are someone who's a liberal or a conservative or a Trumper or a, you know, and it's just, you're not hearing them anymore. You're not seeing them. Whereas you used to, oh, that's Bob. And, you know, he cuts my grass for me all the time. So even though we don't agree politically, I will actually listen to who he wants to vote for so-and-so locally, because he's a smart guy and I trust him, you know, and a lot of that has been broken down as well, in addition to this sort of the community changing fast.
Yeah. You know, each of you have mentioned in almost every remark the word trust. And I didn't actually think I was going to ask about trust as one of our early questions, but I am curious because each of you has gravitated to this, that there's sort of this nexus. There's like a nugget of there's distrust, that building trust matters. And so let's, in the local context, I'm curious, let's first kick it, Tony, to you. You know, how do you think trust has played a role, or maybe distrust has played a role in how communities view local media in Pittsburgh?
Well, you know, I've been here for 30 years, and I can tell you that for most of those years, certainly for more than 2 decades of those 30 years, there was very little trust, at least in the African-American community here, in the local media, whether it was a newspaper, whether it was radio, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously this is before social media became a factor, because these communities were traditionally left out of coverage, or when there was coverage, it was sloppy or stereotypical or hackneyed or non-existent. There were even studies commissioned by the foundations to explore the perception of you know, Black people in the media, the presentation, I should say, of Black folks in the media here. And those reports were absolutely devastating, because it laid bare the fact that there really wasn't a public service component to journalism when it came to the African-American community. It was basically exploitative or sensationalistic, or it was not there. I mean, when you saw Black folks on the front page of the PG, or, you know, the Pittsburgh Press, or you know, they were either in shackles, or there was some tragedy, a shooting, or it was, you know, Magic Johnson saying he has AIDS. It was always something pathological. And so it was impossible to be a Black person in Pittsburgh and take local news seriously, because, you know, you were aware of your own existence, and you knew that it wasn't all pathological, and it wasn't all tragedy, and it wasn't all of these things. Yet that was the presentation. And so unless you were someone like me, who was in the media and trying, my best to counteract a lot of that. There just wasn't a lot of engagement. And so, whereas now I think there is an attempt at all levels, and you see some amazing journalism being done vis-a-vis the African-American community, but what Mila is doing at Public Source, with all of these young, reporters of color, just going out into the community and covering things. And what we've tried to do in recent years is sort of recover some credibility on that front. I think we have to sort of like earn all of us, collectively, as Pittsburgh media, earn the trust of this community. I keep ranting about this because I've been ranting about this for 20 odd years. The Post-Gazette has never had a female columnist of color. I mean, something that simple. There was a report out of Pitt a few years ago about how Pittsburgh is like one of the absolutely worst places in the country for a Black woman to live. Well, goddamn, I would have thought that as soon as that report came out, that a responsible editor would have gone hunting for a Black female columnist to explore, to explain this discrepancy, this disparity, I should say. And to put us on the road to being taken seriously as a full-orbed, news operation that is aware of other dimensions. And that's my favorite rant right there. But I think it's indicative of what is missing. Voices are missing, and it really does take, thank God, you can read Taranay Adia in City Paper, or you read these incredible essays in Public Source. They're there, but I think we need to spread that around.
Well, let's talk about the Pittsburgh Media Partnership then, because I feel like this is such a great example in many ways of trying to undo and then create something else. And one of the initial projects, Amy Jo, I want to talk about is there was a pre-pandemic effort to report on the lack of diversity in the region in conjunction with the 2020 census, which was so fascinating. And I'm curious, to all of Tony's points, can you talk sort of how you see through the partnership, how we might better serve local readers, and how are you doing that?
Yeah, and specifically to your point about, there are readers that have not been served, right? So for me, that's a big focus of how do we fix that? And we, as in I say collectively and over time, not tomorrow, like we have a solution in place, but I think that there's ways that we can be investing right now in BIPOC owned and led outlets who are already doing that work, right? They have been doing so much, and it hasn't been recognized or noticed by the funders or gotten sort of the amplification that it should in terms of that work. And so I think you start there, start listening to them, start investing in them. I think that you have to, collectively, we need to have a conversation about how we hire. How do we recruit journalists in town? How do we hire? How do we treat them when we onboard them, when we bring them into our organization? And how do we treat them, as they are pitching stories and working with editors? We need to have some pretty hard conversations about the fact that what we have been doing hasn't been working. So what can we do to change that, right? And I want to put a shout out there to say, maybe we should consider bringing back the copy editors. Because what I would love is for us to pay more attention to the language that we're using. The default, we have so much shorthand that we just will, when it comes to how we talk about neighborhoods, when it comes to how we describe certain events, all of these things, those are things that we as journalists who love words, we can fix that. Like we could start talking about things more precisely, which solves a whole lot of other issues. And then also thinking about the framing, headline writing, again, because the way that information gets shared, the headline is such an important piece of how people interpret what the story is going to say. We need to be thoughtful about that. And I think the more that becomes part of our practice as well, the more that we start to show that we are listening and that we are reflecting back reality to people who haven't seen themselves reflected back fairly in the work that we've been doing so far.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, headlines really are a big deal. I mean,
Yeah.
it may hurt our egos sometimes to think that that's as far as some folks go, but sometimes that's like the whole deal, and it forms an impression about the source of the information. And I 3 snaps for we do need the return of the copy editors desperately, or at least I do, because they save our asses, and they also help us think about what we're writing there. Sometimes you have a closer relationship with the copy editor than you do with the editor, the person who is nominally responsible or co-responsible for what you put out there. At least at the Post-Gazette, we used to have probably the best bench of copy editors in Western Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, most of them were eliminated as we drifted towards the idea of a universal copy desk, where copy editors were responsible for every department as opposed to specializing in one department. And they were also the first to be encouraged to take buyouts, unfortunately. So we lost what I consider the spiritual backbone of the paper, as well as all of that knowledge that copy editors have. I mean, just of the region, they were the keepers of the information and all of that knowledge, even more so than reporters in many cases. So, yeah.
Well, we got a question in the chat, and I want to encourage more of our audience to put questions in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, I will find it. But, this was a question that gets at how media serves communities. How are newspapers, how are other forms of media meeting communities where they are and finding them to give them the information they need? And I think that's a really good segue, Mila, for you, because I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the nonprofit model of investigative journalism. And specifically, the reason I ask it is because I think that nonprofit newsrooms can, in many ways, they've baked into their structure a kind of community outreach by necessity. And I think that has helped embed some of the best practices that we see now with engagement journalism, with literally like calling out to communities. And so I'm curious how you see that role of community support, funding, all various aspects of local nonprofit journalism.
That's a huge question, Nora. Thank you. It's an excellent question, because I do think that nonprofit journalism is an important model that has emerged. And it's true that right now, Institute for Nonprofit News, that is a professional organization where a lot of the nonprofits come together, nonprofit newsrooms, and it has grown substantially. There are now 284 members in INN network. But I do think that nonprofit journalism is not just a go-to solution to what local journalism means or needs right now, although it is an exciting and potentially promising puzzle of that complicated issue that we are all grappling with on how to sustain meaningful journalism that engages with a lot of communities of different size. For us, yes, public source functions every day. We come to work with the mission that public source inspires critical thinking and bold ideas through journalism rooted in facts, diverse voices, and pursuit of transparency. Like, we know that. We also know that our values, we are very specific about what is important to us, and trustworthiness. Like, we have 5 values: be trustworthy, take risks, otherwise, and be innovative, otherwise we're not going to survive. Tell a story. Storytelling is at the core of everything that we do. Collaborate for the common good, because it's very important for, again, for building the trust, and then foster an inclusive workplace and journalistic platform to the idea of representation. So like with those 5 tenets of values, you are figuring out what stories you're going to pursue, because we know that we are not going to be everything for everybody. You know, the beautiful bundling of a newspaper that used to be sort of the foundation of local journalism, unfortunately those years are gone. And you know, it has been, what we have been seeing is unbundling. People either focus on, you know, specific communities, or they focus only on opinion journalism, or they focus on, you know, the whole movement of Substack today is like, you are going with one voice and you are going to attract your own audience. So we have seen a lot of that. What our nonprofit newsroom believes is that we are people who come together under this values with this mission, and we are using the framework of the Maynard Institute of Fault Lines that relies on representation of sources and how we pursue those stories. We try to, you know, again, like talk about food chain of journalism. We know that we are not staffed to do what the Post-Gazette is able to do, have a person in the city county building, you know, reporting on what is happening there. So we are trying to identify gaps and explanatory investigative efforts on how we can channel them, sort of putting a laser focus on those issues. And yes, they are super time consuming, but we know that we can maybe make some progress on that, right? But that reporting would not be possible if, you know, we didn't have Tom Davison, for example, reporting out of city county meetings, you know, because we read everything that is being published and then decide, okay, I think that here is a question that we should go after. Here are the records that we should file. Here are the perspectives that are being missed. And maybe we can think of first-person story that could really illustrate that perspective. So,
but you know, Mila, I mean, you guys would be absolutely perfect if you only had a sports desk.
It would definitely be.
I mean, you're like, well, sports, Mila, what is the matter with you? You're in Pittsburgh. Oh my God.
Yeah, if my success were evaluated by pages, I would absolutely go after that. Although the athletic has put a huge dent on that as well, on local sports reporting. But yeah, you're right. And that goes into the identity question, right? Why do people read? Why do they engage? Why do they care? I think that those are also the questions that we grapple with. And, you know, somebody like to our funding model, it's also very difficult because every year you have to apply for grants, you have to sustain the support of your smaller donors, build robust membership program. And in such small market as Pittsburgh, it's also very hard to gain corporate support, because if you are doing truly investigative journalism, who would want to get into this, right? I want my brand to be associated with positive stories about the region. And you guys are creating so much tension and rocking the boat and challenging a status quo. I don't want to be associated with you. So this is just the nature of the beast. And I, as a public source representative, I don't make any promises. And because then I don't have a reason to exist. Then it's going to be sponsored content and not journalism. And I think that's what makes it very complicated on what the future is going to look like, because it's very hard work. It requires a lot of creativity, and there is unfortunately not a like, this is a model that will work and you should try it. Every market is different. Every how much journalism you can sustain, the size of it, the fragmentation of Pittsburgh. I mean, we are all segmented by our rivers and by our neighborhoods. And one neighborhood thinks that they're not getting covered. Their lives are defined by certain issues. So it's very, and the population is very fragmented as well. I think if we are writing about immigrant community, Black community, if we are writing about housing issues, some rich white donor may read and say, well, I don't know, like this, give me more solutions journalism. Why are you writing about doom and gloom? But for other people, it's like, no, this my voice is finally getting heard. But for other people, they have never had an issue of their voice not being heard.
Right.
So for them, like, this is like, why are you doing the series on Allegheny County Jail? And I think it's very difficult, even if you are not trying to be everything for everybody, to explain how the kitchen works. Our work is so tense. It's like, it feeds off of conflict. It's always in tension, right? And unfortunately, there is also a lost sense of how journalism is being put together, because there is not just a reporter who is involved in writing a story. And there is always then reactions, right? People feel like they're not being honestly represented or well represented. And then if you had a bad experience with a TV reporter and another reporter who may be steeped in good ethics and right practices of building trust with community members, approaches that person, because of their previous experience, they have to undo the perception and then build trust. And it takes so much time and so much work. That it's just really hard.
And we can't put the burden of media literacy just on the public. I mean, we've just done a lousy job as professionals sort of explaining what we do. It's shocking how many people will castigate me in the comments section of my column, saying, you know what, columnist Tony Norman, you're never objective. They don't understand the concept of a column versus a news story, versus an editorial, versus a letter to the editor. I mean, it's something that we all take for granted, but there really is just a vast ignorance about what we do. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean, people literally don't understand the purpose of news and its various phases. And so we spend a lot of time just sort of like explaining basics to people, and they get pissed off. You think about all the people who drop their subscriptions to the PG because our political cartoonist, Rob Rogers, who was the best in the country, was fired. I mean, they completely negated the fact that despite this managerial incompetence on the part of the PG, there was still incredible reporting going on at that very second that needed to be supported. And so, because they just assumed, wow, they fired Rob Rogers, that means they're completely right-wing and everything that comes out of that paper is not to be trusted. It's so unsophisticated and so dumb. And that hurts us, as a community in the long run, because then where do you turn for a source of information, a place that has the resources to really dig into the things that are really going to affect your life? And so you cut off your nose to spite your face. It's dumb.
Well, I'm looking at time, and I am.
Oh,
I'm sad to say we are going to have to wind down. This is so exciting to listen to all of you. And why don't, I'll sort of close with one final question, and then I'd like to just, thank our partners, but I want to hear from all of you. Selfishly, I'm going to be really honest, selfishly, I sit here, I'm an advocate. I work on policy. And I think a lot about how we can sustain local journalism. That's what I think about. And you are tasked, of course, then with the actual tactics, like the doing of what local journalism means. And the reason we hold these sessions are, Tony, completely to your point, that there's so much communities have to learn about what your industry is doing.
Yes.
Whether it's the difference between, why I hate my journalist for a headline I didn't know he didn't write.
Right.
That's the most common one. These are often moments, I think of it as like kind of opening up slowly something that has been closed. And one of the things that I hear communities say is they had no idea you all go through what you're going through. That you think about these issues, that you think about how do we reach communities? How do we convey? How do we craft stories? How do we find sources and build trust? And that's all for the communities. And I guess because I have all of you, I have to ask my selfish question of how do you think Pittsburgh, and specifically in this Pennsylvania ecosystem, how can news experts collaborate better together?
Oof.
Because I see that, maybe I'll start with Amy Jo, or I feel
I was
like
wondering if I was going to get that first.
yeah, I feel like there's something there where part of what I have heard from all of you today is that over and over there is distrust. There is, Mila, the fantastic concept of an unbundling of options for readers, that everything has become siloed, and that there's less and less awareness of the broader everything that you deal with. And so that's why I'm curious, among each other, how do you think we can collaborate?
I think there are a couple of things. I want to point out that within our partnership, we have 23 members. 15 of them are for profit. And one of the things that I also think is really important, and it tells such a powerful story. Even though we have, Mila and Public Source and ESA and the Trib, which are probably some of the larger size newsrooms in the region, most of our partners are actually trying to work and produce news with 2 or fewer full-time employees.
Wow.
Many of them, we have a number of them who are doing it is unpaid labor. And so, we've been working with the American Journalism Project to kind of do a deep study of the market and to look at what the community's information needs are, where some of the gaps are in terms of coverage. And one of their findings, the project's still in the works, but one of the early findings that they shared with us was Pittsburgh has more news outlets than a lot of regions in the country. That's just a really, again, but we're small. And they're often niche, and they're very under-resourced. And when we're looking at the models for how we fund them, it's not that for-profit doesn't work. It's that it's really hard to get the capital to invest to make it work, right? Like that's part of where we need to be starting and talking about right now, is a lot of folks need to be invested in. There are a lot of journalists who want to do different, want to change, want to do the type of storytelling that we're hearing that the communities desperately want us to do. They want to make the changes, but they don't have time. They don't have the resources. We've got to invest in some of this infrastructure if you want to see the results ultimately come up. Sorry, I feel very passionate about that. Like, because I don't see a way. You can't you've got to work on some of these deeper problems.
Yeah. It boils down to, show me the money. If you're a journalist, I mean, you have to make a living wage, and you have to be in a journalistic environment you believe is dedicated to the propagation of journalism, that you are pursuing a noble cause and not just a rankly commercial one, that isn't just sort of, another way of expressing capitalism. So yeah, investing in the the human art of journalism. It's an art as well as a democratic necessity.
There are a lot of different efforts going on right now on how to creatively, inject more funding into journalism, which are exciting. And thank you for your work at PEN America for advocating for that. I do think that, I know that for Americans, it may be frowned upon to say, well, the government needs to step in. But I do think that there could be creative ways to do that. Like, look at how it's done in some European countries where that is sustained. And how much do we value what we say is democracy if we are not gonna put our money where our mouths are? So I think that that's really important. And maybe there are creative ways. Like, I know some organizations are working on an effort to give credits to consumers on basically being able to invest in an outlet of their choice, a certain amount of money, which is a very creative way. It's not government allocating money. And then the journalism outlets would be motivated to earn that credit and engage with different audiences based on that. I mean, I think that there are a lot of creative solutions, but I think that you're not going to fix that issue, such a huge need, with a big grant. I think that you really need a very serious effort and commitment on a country level, that this is philosophically important. And I know that, unfortunately, national dynamics do not warrant such hope, but I guess I'm gonna.
Well, we're trying, Mila. We're doing everything we can.
I'm sending all my positive energy your way to make it happen. So thank you for your work.
Well, I couldn't have paid all of you to give the perfect tee up for all of the work that I know we and our partners are doing on this. And it is to further what I think is essential for communities and for all of you to be advancing connection. We know that when local news withers, people are less likely to vote, less likely to know about elections. We know that there is this lifeline that all of you provide. So it has been such an honor to lead you through this for our audience. And it's been an honor to see all of you and be and sort of just exist with you in this weird online realm. So I do want to close us out by giving everyone who has been here as a panelist a huge thank you. I have to say, this is when sort of my Mexican party side comes out, and I wish we could all clap together, but we aren't together. I'm all for the standing ovations and the ongoing applause for Amy, Jo, and Mila and Tony. So if you're here, please just sort of clap your hands. Thank you all so much. Do you hear it, Tony?
A little bit.
There we go. And then I want to thank our partners, because Pittsburgh Media Partnership, of course, Free Press, the just unbelievably amazing World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. They're our forever partners now. We're never going to stop bothering them. So Betty and Olivia, I just want to give you a huge shout out. And then I'll finally say just one piece about moving forward. And that is that too often, I think people feel their voices do not matter. And we are so committed to elevating the way our voices matter. And so what I did was I tried to include in the chat ways that you can also, as audience members, take action, how you can support local journalism through policies that are being introduced in Congress, and to really make clear that even if this doesn't sound exciting, it is the most essential work to be doing. Mm-hmm. And we are very eager to continue with all of you. So Mila, Amy, Jo, Tony, thank you again. You have been a joy.
Thank you, Nora. Great job. All right.
Thank you all.
Yes, we'll check out.